Hey, I'm the tailorette and I will be making a girl's Regency dress. I had my first request from a customer this week. When you purchase the pattern from senseandsensibility.com, it comes in PDF form, so you have to print it off on the printer on the poster setting. There's directions on the pattern of how to do that. I ended up having to stay up a little bit later last night because I got a little bit behind due to some things coming up. The pages are all numbered, so I ended up taping all the pieces together like tiles. Once that was all taped together, I ended up cutting out the pattern pieces. Now, I cut out the skirt because it's just straight lines, and if I want to do different sizes, I can just fold on the lines and cut accordingly. Whereas with the other pattern pieces, I use a tissue paper and trace on top of that so I can get the actual piece. Because if I cut that out, I won't be able to fold on the curved lines. So I use tissue for that, and then I ended up translating that to the actual fabric and cutting it out on the fabric. So this morning I am ready to go, ready to sew this thing together. So here's my instructions for the pattern. And then I have my measurements from my customer that I printed out. And here are my pattern pieces, skirt piece. Those are the tissue pieces that I cut the pattern pieces out. So for this next step, I will be looking at the instructions. And it looks like I'm going to be doing the back pieces. It's pretty much assembled very similarly to the women's pattern. The center back to the side backs, and then press that open just like I normally would. So that will be these guys. That's what I'll be starting with, and I'll be sewing them to right in here. And these are my linings and my outer pieces. These need to be pressed, but we'll work on that. So I will literally be sewing these on a curve. So when I put it down like this, turning it, bending backwards, almost like doing a back bend, but with fabric. So basically, we'll be doing that on all of these back pieces. And then I'll trim the edges so I can press these open. Now that I trimmed this and I have my curves sewn together, as you can see, I'm literally going to lay it flat like that. And my iron's on high because this is 100% cotton. And I'll just press it down. That's called a princess seam in the back. I think I need some water in my iron actually. Do that to all the pieces. So I revisited the instructions and it's basically the same as the women's pattern. You just take, except there's no gathers in the front on the bodice, you literally take the front piece that we cut on the fold, and these are one of the pieces that I just sewed together, and I'm going to stitch side seams like so, just like this, and then I'll sew the shoulders together too, but I'll start with the side seams first. Now I'm doing the shoulder seam. I'm sewing all the seams together in a chain style so that I don't have to keep cutting thread off the machine. Alright, ready to press out the seams now. Back to the iron. And you've probably seen me do this in my other videos with my other dresses. Basically pressing open these seams. This is the side seam right here. And then this is my shoulder seam here that I'm pressing open, keeping it flat. So basically this next part, you'll take the lining or the outer layer, whatever that is, and the shell, and pin, this is the neckline right here, and this is the back where the buttons will be. Pin it together and do it on pin the shoulder seam here. I just pin at shoulder seam, so I'm going to leave it at that. Here's my neckline. I'm stitching the center back and then around the neckline. Alright, stitched around there, and I'm going to trim the neckline so it's not so bulky. So here's how this works. I'm not sure if you can see this, but I stay stitching. I just stay stitched right on here, and the back part of the seam is pointed this way. So the seam allowance is pointed this way, and I'm literally just pulling it open and stitching right 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. Do this all the way around the neckline. I do this on my women's dresses too, to keep them nice and crisp at the neckline. All right, go to the iron and finishing off the stay stitching. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but here's my stay stitching. Basically, if you can see that, here's my stitching, here's the outer shell. So I did the stay stitching on the lining, and then I'll take the iron and press it down. And the goal is to have the seam on the fold, so you can't even see the seam, all the way around the neckline. You can see, here's our neckline. It's nice and crisp. You can't even see where the seam is, but here's our stay stitching right here. That keeps it from crawling up and showing in the front. And we have a crisp, clean edge. So I'm moving on to the sleeves now that the bodice is finished. And I'm going to run some running stitches, which are gathering stitches. There are some markings on the sleeves. So I will do double stitches side by side, one at 1/4 inch and then away from the edge, and then another 1/2 inch from the edge. Then I will stitch the sleeves together at the underarm. And then on one side of the sleeve band, I'm going to press under 1/4 inch. So about like that, all the way around. Doing that to both sleeve bands. And then I take my sleeves and I will gather them to fit inside the bands. Okay, and then this is the part where I put the sleeves into the bodice. About ready. We're gonna put the sleeves officially onto the bodice. And so here I'm getting my placket ready to be sewn into the back of the skirt. I'm going to cut a 4-inch opening in the back. I have my little placket made at 8 inches here, starting at 3/8 all the way down like so. Creating an opening so that it can come on easily. I'm doing this before I stitch my skirt pieces together, just because it's easier to work with without having that other piece there. Here we go, and the placket is sewn in, and I will press it on the iron. So now I will press it around like this so that the seam allowance is going in, like that, in all the way around. I want this to be folded under, so after I pressed it, now I'll take it, and we're basically trying to make it look like it's just a part of the gathers once I add the gathers in there. Press it down, trim this off, this extra. I usually have a little extra left over. And now we're ready to sew the skirt pieces together. And I'll add the running stitches around the top now. And now it's time to stitch the bodice to the skirt officially. Stitch it together. I'll do it on the serger because it trims it as it goes, and this just makes it more secure underneath so that there's no fraying or anything. And this next part, fold this under. This is the lining, and I'm just folding it underneath, and this will be hand stitched closed. And here I'm stitching the sleeve bands closed. So I'm laying this down, and I'm going to measure from the shoulder down to make sure that the length is the right length. Looks like it's a little bit longer than I would like it to be, but I think that I might add a few tucks in there just to save some of that length. Now I'm ready to start working on the tucks. So I'll fold it over, say about, oops, I got 2 tape measures around my neck. I don't know how I didn't notice that. 4.5 inches all the way around, and then I will stitch it at 1 inch from the folded edge. This way, as she grows, she can actually let out the tucks and there will be length. At the same time, while she's not tall enough to let out the tucks, it still looks really pretty. I'm going to stitch it at 1 inch. Here's the 1 inch mark right here. And I'll just stitch all the way around. It's officially done, but I want to make sure that the last measurement is right, that the length is right. This is looking adorable. So measure from here down. It's perfect. The lovely details of these tucks has a little bit more interest to the dress. So, and I do plan on putting little pantaloons underneath. So once the dress is finished, it'll have little pantaloons coming out at the bottom. So yes. And that concludes this video. Thank you for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed watching me and my little project this week. So that is what I have going on in the studio. I have to make one more that is in a pink pastel color. However, on Friday, I do plan on having another creative project that I'm creating. So I am not making I am going to make a Spencer jacket, but it's going to be a short sleeve Spencer jacket to go over the white dress. And then hopefully I can bring another white dress to come together to go underneath my jackets that I've made. So hit the subscribe button so that I can see you here Friday.